Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Melissa. Today I'm making a doll-sized breakfast nook with a bay window and bench seats. But before I start on that, I do have a quick channel update. Starting this month, I am changing my video schedule. So instead of posting every Friday, I'm going to be releasing each video as I finish it. And I'm hoping this will give me a little more flexibility in what and how often I post. Now back to the project. So first I need to decide the shape of the window seats. And that's because it's going to affect the shape of the floor, which is where I normally start. So I have a doll here, and what I'm going to do is I need to determine the depth and then the width of the seat. So the depth is pretty easy. You just start kind of at the back of the doll and decide how far forward on the doll you want the chair to come. I'm leaning towards about 2.5 inches. This is also partly based on, I always double check with my own furniture just to see what's already been done, because a lot of times it takes the guesswork out of it. So 2.5 inches deep. And then for the width, I actually want it wider. So that's pretty much, if the doll is sitting like this, then you want to put the ruler behind it and kind of measure how wide it needs to be. Realistically, they only need to probably be about 3 inches, probably at the most, normally. But since this is a bench, I want more width, so I'm going with 4 inches. So I have a piece of paper here, and I've folded it in half. And my first line needs to be 2 inches from the fold, which would be a total of 4 inches, but again, it's folded in half. So 2 inches from the fold. I'll go ahead and make that first line. Next, I want the side. So if this is the middle seat, then there's one on the side, and it's going to be at an angle. My paper's not wide enough, so I'm going to have to add some more to it. So you imagine this is half of the seat. So if he's sitting like that, then this needs to come at an angle, but it can't be like too narrow of an angle or they'll be too close. And if it's too wide, then of course you just lose the shape altogether. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to draw another line. This time it is the full 4 inches because this is not on the fold. So these lines here are the front edge of the seats. So then I need to measure from here back 2.5 inches to get the depth. 2.5, and then 2.5 again. And you'll notice I'm drawing really wide lines with these, and that's just because of all of those angles. I wanted to make sure I definitely have the room for it. Now I need to straighten off this edge here. So now I'm going to cut it out through both layers. And I'm doing it this way because it basically gives me a symmetrical pattern. Like, I don't have to worry about trying to get the angle right on both sides. So now I can unfold it. And this should be my bench piece. Now to double check that, I'm going to bring the dolls back in so he can sit there. And remember, assuming jointed dolls, the knees would be bent, so they're not going to be running into each other like they are going to be here. So then if he's sitting there, she can sit here. And there should be plenty of room that they won't be like running into each other too much. So with the seat figured out, now I can go ahead and cut the floor. I have a sheet of foam board. It's actually not a full sheet. I'll probably have to get more in order to finish this project. I don't know how much it actually shows up on the camera because it's white on white. But my thought is that this one side of the wall obviously is going to be the shape of the bench. And then the other is just going to be straight. And I think I'm just going to flip this over and have it kind of be straight edges. So one here and then the straight edge, basically double the depth of the seat. So now I'm going to just trace out this back edge there, straight down. I cut the floor out using a box cutter. This is just one that came from Dollar Tree. And once it was fully cut out on the floor, I marked out where the front of the bench would be, so I knew where I didn't need to put any flooring. I chose a wood plank scrapbook paper for the floor. I would have liked something lighter, but this was the lightest color I had, and I was not about to do a popsicle stick floor. I cut the paper in half and glued it down with a glue stick. As it got higher, I kind of pieced it together a bit, and because of that, there was just this one really small spot that didn't get covered, but it's all the way in the back, so it's not a big deal. Next, the wall. I measured around all the edges of the floor except for that long, straight front edge. According to my notes, it measured about 32 5/8 inches. So I cut the wall 13 inches tall and 32 5/8 inches long. Or so I thought. I realized I was wrong during the next step. So now I have my wall cut out, and the width of it should be the same as like going around all of these edges. And what I'm going to try and do is to score the foam board at each point. There would be a bend in the floor. I've got it with what I want to be the back facing up, and I apologize if this is hard to see with the overhead camera. This is a big project, and so it doesn't fit very well in the space that I have for this. So I am just going to line up the floor with this edge with that edge of the door, and I need to mark it, and I've lost my pen. Oh, there it is. It's about right there. I've got my ruler and line everything up as neatly as possible, and go ahead and draw that line. And what I'm going to try and do, and I don't know if this is actually going to work, is to cut through the foam board, but not all the way through. I want it to still be connected at the front on the paper. So I'm going to cut this very lightly. And if I've done this correctly, it should bend. Ah, yes. So see, it bends here. And if I place my floor here, you can see where it lines up. And now I need to do it on the next one and all the way around. So now I'm on to this side. I'm going to line up the corner of the floor with that cut edge. And this is where it's getting to where it has to be a little more precise, because if I'm off, it's really going to be a lot harder to fix it. Yes, that is right. And now I am realizing that I obviously cut something wrong, because this is going to be too short. I have a feeling I cut it to 2.5 or 23.5 instead of 32 5/8, or something like that. So I will fix that when I get to it. I ended up cutting the rest of the wall in 2 pieces because I didn't have a piece large enough to do the whole thing. I attached these to the original wall with hot glue along the thickness, and then reinforced it by gluing paper over the crack on the back of the wall. I then scored the remaining section. To attach the wall, I applied hot glue to the edge of the floor, then pressed the wall on, doing my best to keep the 2 edges even. I have a bad habit of running my finger along the edges to make sure that everything is even and to remove excess glue. As I said, it's a bad habit and I don't recommend it. With the room done, I moved on to the window seat. I used my pattern from earlier and cut it out for the seat of the bench. To determine the height, I measured a chair that I already had and then subtracted the thickness of the foam board. I ended up with 2.5 inches. I then measured the 3 inner curves of the bench seat and cut foam board that length and 2.5 inches wide. I scored and attached it to the inner curve the same way I did on the walls. And you'll notice here that I relocated so that I was actually near an outlet to have the glue gun plugged in. I cut 2 smaller pieces to glue to those remaining front edges. I considered adding decorative molding to the front of the bench, but decided that since it was going to be behind the table, it wouldn't be very visible anyway. So I moved on to gluing the bench into the room. I knew I had to move pretty quickly to get this in place before the glue set. However, I'm not sure I actually succeeded but it is in there. Now there are supposed to be windows behind the bench, so I found a landscape image from Unsplash, which I resized and printed across 2 sheets of paper. I trimmed off the excess paper and then cut the image into 3 pieces. Height-wise, they're all slightly less than the short side of printer paper, which is 8.5 inches, and the width was 1 to 2 inches narrower than whatever wall that piece was being glued to. I glued each one to the wall using stick glue. I didn't measure, I just did my best to get everything centered and at the same height. Then I used 1/4 inch strips of foam board and glued them around the edge of each picture for molding. I cut 3 rectangles about 1.5 inches wide and slightly longer than the width of the windows. I wrapped them in fabric and glued them to the top for valances. I made a matching cushion for the bench by folding the fabric in half and then sewing around the bench pattern, leaving a small opening. I then cut it out, clipped the curves, and flipped it right sides out. I pressed it before gluing it to the bench. Now up to this point, I was planning on the table being either a rectangle or an oval. However, when looking for inspiration, I noticed that there was one table that was done where the side of the table that was closest to the window was shaped the same as the window. And that made more sense to me, so I used the negative cutout from the bench to cut the table, just making it a little deeper on that front end. I determined the table height the same as I did for the chairs and cut 2 tall, skinny rectangles for legs. So I have the table and the 2 table legs cut out, and I need to know kind of where to position the legs on the table so that they fit when the dolls are in there. So if I go ahead and assume if somebody's sitting in the middle here, the legs need to come at least wide enough to fit on either side of his feet, and then for the table to go on top. I had this balanced a minute ago. Of course, as soon as I turn the camera on, it doesn't work. So you can imagine it's going to sit something like that, and the width is, there probably needs to be about 2.5 inches between these 2 pieces. So I need to cut a few like brace pieces to hold them in place. I cut 3 base pieces and glued them between the legs, one at the top, one about 1/3 of the way down, and then one at the bottom. I then glued the base to the center of the table. I wanted to glue the table in place, so I set it in and used the dolls to determine where the placement should go. I wanted it to be close enough that the dolls looked like they were sitting at the table, but far enough out that they could still easily be put in and out. Once I was satisfied with the placement, I glued it in. For the seats on the other side of the table, I had planned to make chairs, but the same picture that changed my mind about the table also changed this because it has a bench seat. And I'm all for that because it's less work and uses less foam board, which I was running out. Making this bench is all rectangles and really not that specific. The seat was cut the same depth as the window seat, and the length was slightly smaller than that of the table. I covered this piece with a layer of flannel and then wrapped fabric around it, which is what I probably should have done for the other bench seat, but I didn't because at that time I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I then cut 2 more rectangles, shorter and narrower than the seat, to use as braces. I glue one of the brace pieces to the bottom of the seat. Then I glue one of the legs on one side, attach the other brace to that leg about midway down, and then attach the final leg to it. And these legs are the same height as the base of the other bench seat and just a little narrower than the top of this bench. Now looking at this, I decided that the side walls were too blank. And to remedy this, I cut a couple pieces of foam board and stamped an image on each one, and then glued them in. And here it is. I'm thrilled with how it turned out. It is supposed to be a gift, but I'd definitely keep it if I didn't already have a dining area in my dollhouse. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another handmade happening.